Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for the Urban Science Wards Auto Fast Chat. Today we have with us Pierre-Michel Robaza. He is the Global Practice Director for Urban Science After Sales Performance Solutions, and he's going to talk with us a little bit about the, if you will, resurgence of hybrid vehicles, certainly the sales, but also how they impact fixed ops, specifically service departments. One thing I'd like to ask you, just for our viewers, can you tell us a little bit about Urban Science and the type of work you do there?
Absolutely. So Urban Science, a consulting firm, we make heavy use of technology and data in delivering our solution, mostly in the automotive industry. We've been in the business for a long time, actually since the 70s. And originally we were known for our network planning practice, where we were helping the dealers and the manufacturer identify the best location to put dealership. Now, over time, that has evolved. And in the management of the ongoing performance of the dealers from a new vehicles and also from a financial standpoint. More recently, we have been moving into the media space. We have access to some great data that we receive on an almost daily basis. We call it near real time on new vehicle sales, covering 95% of the industry here in the United States. So we are able to help ad tech companies, OEM, dealers in their marketing effort, both at the beginning in building their custom audiences. For instance, with suppression, identifying customers that already purchased the vehicle. And then after the fact, when we do the analysis for media performance, basically matching the customer in their audiences against the sales. And we do that on a daily basis, basically, because of access to this data. And then there is after sales. That's the area I'm responsible for. And it's really, I have two big responsibilities. One has to do with the management of our business intelligence solution and the continuous development of that. It's called Service View. We receive about 15,000, repair order and part sales data from about 15,000 dealers on a daily basis. Most of them are daily. And with that, we basically insert that into our business intelligence solution and are able to measure performance, help them identify opportunity, but also have tools to actually capture that opportunity with marketing, in the marketing space, but also in capacity planning. Then the other thing that we do is we use that data to basically increase our thought leadership and generate insights, both internally, outside. We publish articles, and then, of course, interviews like today's.
That's fascinating. And we are all so happy that you're here with us because we really want to know what trends you're observing in the market, especially regarding electrification. Big topic for everybody, of course.
Yeah, again, using the same new vehicle sales data hub that was mentioning before, we can do those services. But of course, we can also do the more traditional analysis. And we look at that regularly. And basically, up to yesterday, we can track new vehicle sales. And what we are noticing, basically, the retail industry is pretty much flat. It's about 1% over year compared to last year. However, the electric vehicle or electrified vehicle as a whole are up quite substantially, in just below 20%.
Okay.
Now, within the electric vehicle, we actually like to divide it into three different segments: the battery electric one, the plug-in, and the electric one without the plug-ins, the gas electric, if you want.
Sure.
And again, there is quite a lot of difference in performance between them. Battery electric being up about 8%, while the other two are much higher. Plug-in are in very close to 20% more year over year, and gas electric are 30% more. So very big differences between the three groups. Basically, consumers moving a little bit away from battery electric and purchasing hybrid vehicles, both in the plug-in and the gas electric one. Now, that's a national number. What is also interesting to see is that differentiation nationally, which is heavily influenced by what's going on state by state level. So the first thing to note is that there are 5 states that account for 50% of the electrified market. Okay. So it's heavily concentrated in California, Texas, Florida, New York, and New Jersey. And then within each state, there are differentiation. For instance, surprisingly, we saw a decline of battery electric vehicle in California. And that's quite surprising, with the opposite, about more than 30% growth instead on the gas electric. In Texas is the plug-in hybrid that actually showed a decline. and more than 50% on gas electric growth, which is, again, remarkable. And in Florida, instead, Florida's a hot market in every sense, I guess, definitely on electric vehicle.
Definitely.
The numbers here show battery electric up 30%, plug-in 25%, and hybrid 48%. So gas hybrid 48%. So big market is growing really fast in Florida. So big differentiation, and we see that also on a state-by-state level. Now, looking forward, what this is meaning is basically the way they interpreted it is consumers moving away from battery into hybrid because of concern with range. Correct? They don't see the infrastructure in place still to get to long distances. Maybe it's okay for everyday commute, but the long distances where they start to push back. And how do they address that? They are not waiting for the infrastructure necessary to be there. They want the benefit of the electric vehicle, the comfort, the speed, the acceleration, of course, the economy that they bring. But they're doing it by buying vehicles that allows them to give them the extended range that hybrid vehicle basically give. And it's going to be interesting to see if that actually is going to be a trend that continues. We have an objective of 50%, or the government has an objective of 50%. Yes. By 2030. And I think we're going to be able to get there, but just not so much because of the infrastructure, even though it will continue growing, but because of the introduction of more hybrid, especially extended range hybrid. I'm going to be really interested to see how they're going to be welcomed by the public.
It's interesting when I think about hybrids and just everything. Of course, dealership service departments are, undergoing all kinds of changes and so forth, especially as drivers keep their cars longer. I'm wondering what impact this resurgence of the hybrid vehicles and their sales have on those service departments.
So yes, that is actually something that we decided to look after, having basically worked with the services data for many, many years. And one way of looking at it is actually by measuring what we call service retention. It's a metric heavily used in the industry. And what it does, it measures the percentage of customers that drive a certain brand of vehicle that service within the franchise dealer body over a period of a year. And for ICE vehicle, we have seen that percentage is very high in the early years of ownership. So it can be 80, almost 90% during the first 3 or 4 years. And then it declines. It declines sometimes really fast to the point that it gets below 10% at year 10, 11, and so forth. Now, that is happening not so much because the vehicle needs change. They, of course, are still there, but it's basically an indication of defection towards independent repair. So you have less customers coming in for franchise dealers, and from the 80s and 90s down to the 10% or so when you are in 10, 11 years old in terms of vehicle age. Now, analyzing electric vehicle or battery electric vehicle instead, we notice something completely different. That percentage is very low to begin with. And that is not so much because they're defecting to independent repairs, but because the service need of battery electric vehicles are a lot smaller than the service need of a typical ICE vehicle, especially when it comes to maintenance, which is the main things that you do during the first few years. To the point is half, even a third of what a typical ICE vehicle it is. Now, the other nice part instead is that low level of service retention is maintained in the later year. So what you see, basically the same service need and customers coming back to the franchise dealer and not defecting as much to the independent repair. So they are more loyal to the franchise network, but the numbers are very low because of the type of vehicle that they are driving. So now, speaking about hybrid instead, they are a combination of both, correct? Both from an engine perspective, but we see that also in the data. So indeed, in the first few years, service retention is very high. As a matter of fact, even higher than the ICE vehicle. And then it declines, but it doesn't decline as fast. So you have less defection. The service need are the same. If anything, they're higher as the vehicle ages. But it doesn't decline as fast because more customers show loyalty towards the franchise network. And if on one side, when we were comparing ICE versus battery electric, we were measuring between 40 and 60% less revenue if you were to switch from one to the other completely. With hybrid, actually, we see a gain. We say a gain that varies between 50 and 20% of more retention, more customer coming in over the course of 7 years. Now, on top of that, hybrid vehicle also show higher revenue per order. So every time they are being serviced, there is a little bit more of revenue that is being generated at a customer pay level, of course, when the service is completed. And again, that's because of having both the technologies in them. They requires both more maintenance from that standpoint, but also more repair potentially if things go bad, or even more expensive repair. So that is a double benefit, so to speak. And so, as I said, if in one side we were 40 to 60% less, here we are talking about 30 to 40% more for hybrid compared to the equivalent ICE vehicle. And the way that we are explaining this is basically tied to the complexity of the vehicle. You know, the more complex the vehicle, the less is the likelihood the customers are going to decide to repair that with independent repairs.
I understand. It's interesting. I was going to say, we are just publishing an article, I think it's going today, about what you're talking about. Really how even if a dealership hasn't traditionally sold hybrids or had a huge number of hybrid sales, that they should really get involved in it for so many reasons, many of which you just mentioned. And I guess I'm wondering, when you talk to dealerships, what do you tell them about leveraging the current hybrid trend, not only to maintain their service, but certainly to grow the service revenue, and how can they align it with what the consumers want?
Yes, absolutely. And this is definitely an opportunity to take advantage of, and I think the dealers, what they have to do is leverage what they're known for. So one thing that we do is also, or we do quite regularly, are also surveys that we work in collaboration with the Harris Poll. Okay. And one of the questions that we ask is, what they value when it comes to servicing their vehicle between dealers and independent repairs. And on the top, for the dealership, it's always something that has to do with the quality of the work, with parts, with the knowledge of the technician, and all those things that really have value from the point of view of taking care of the vehicle. Of course, the independent repair, instead, they have the perception of being cheaper, correct? So now when it comes to a hybrid vehicle that has the higher level of contents, this is something that definitely needs to be leveraged. Now, another big recommendation, and I make that all the time, sometimes we forget about it, is to sell more cars. I know we're talking about service, but sometimes it's about selling more cars because, well, as I just explained, in the early years of ownership, that retention is higher. So the more vehicle are being sold initially, so the younger the car park, the more service you're going to be able to execute. But also because when we analyze customers that live in a certain area, and where they buy their car, if they buy their car from the dealership that controls the area, the likelihood that they go servicing there is 2.5 times more. It's not 2%. Wow. It's 250% more if they buy the vehicle. And these are the same customer. They are in the same area. So the psychodemographic, the income level, the proximity to the dealership are the same. But dividing it between those that bought from the dealer and those that didn't buy, the dealer is like 20 to 45 service retention between the two groups. It's a huge, huge difference. And that basically says, make sure that for every customer that drives a vehicle of your brand, you are the dealer selling to it, because it really benefits hugely, not only the sales department, of course, but the service department, because of that higher service retention that comes after the fact. Now, at the other end of the cycle, when you sell the vehicle, the service lanes, the service department are actually the best place to sell the next vehicle. We always hear that, correct, it's cheaper to actually maintain a customer loyal than conquest a new one. So it's not just a matter of selling vehicles from the sales department. The service department should be responsibilized to do that. And we have actually measured that because of that data that I was explaining about before, where we have service data, service loyal customer, we match them against new vehicle sales. And we are seeing that if they're service loyal with the dealer, the likelihood that they repurchase with that dealer instead of another dealer is 2 times higher. And 20% of the customer is 3 times higher. 20% of the dealer is 3 times higher. And the way they interpret that is that it's basically those dealers that have that service to sale handover, really on all those processes, all the ducks lined up, basically, where you could actually offer maybe to do a trade-in, or you Make sure that you have someone from the sales department coming down if someone is waiting. Maybe they can do a test drive, and all other activity that actually drives the sale of the next vehicle from the service lane. Again, going back to the survey, we ask questions like that. How many times were you offered trade-in? How many times were you offered evaluation? And the answer to those questions is always below 15%. We have still, many dealers are still focused in the service department about creating loyalty for service instead of driving loyalty from the next vehicle sale. So those are the kind of the things. So when it comes to hybrid, now with the knowledge of what I shared before about higher service retention, long-term revenue that is higher, maybe be more aggressive on the sales side, right? Because you know that it's going to be coming back from a service perspective going forward. That. And also one other thing that we are seeing is hybrid owners, yes, being loyal, coming back more frequently because the service retention is higher. But in one of the questions that we ask, we say, how many of them would consider switching to another dealership for service of the same brand? And the number is higher for hybrid owners. So it's more loyalty because of their driving a certain vehicle and having taken care by a franchise dealer as opposed to a loyalty built to the dealership itself. So it's very important that dealer differentiates themselves towards other dealers of the same brand, even at the point of sales. So those are kind of the insight that we're able to get, both from quantitative analysis on the data, but also through the surveys that we are conducting.
I can't thank you enough for taking time out today to talk with us about the hybrids, which I think certainly surprised a lot of people, the resurgence of them, if you will, and certainly the sales and how the hybrids impact the fixed ops dealership service departments. So thank you so much for that. And thank you, everybody, for watching this. We had Pierre-Michel Robaza, who is the Global Practice Director for Urban Science After Sales Performance, talking with us for this Urban Science Wards Auto Fast Chat. And I'm Nancy Dunham, Principal Analyst for Retail of Wards Auto. Thank you so much again.
Thank you. Bye-bye.